which is a Sunday. So let's begin. To introduce our author and to moderate tonight's event, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Dennis Slattery. He's coming from Texas. He's a 52-year educator of a myriad of levels. For the past 27 years, Dr. Slattery has been a core faculty member in the Mythological Studies program at Pacific Graduate Institute in Carpinteria, California. He's authored, co-authored, edited, or co-edited 30 volumes, as well as over 200 articles and publications of all scopes. If that's not enough, this award-winning writer is also a published poet and novelist. Please welcome Dr. Dennis Slattery. Hi, Dennis. Welcome.
Hi, Michael, and thank you for having this set up. Let's see here. Yeah, there we go. Well, great. Good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us in this auspicious occasion of Maureen Murdock's book that has been revised and republished after 30 years. And Maureen, a special thank you and welcome to you. And I say thank you because I'm so honored that you invited me to be part of this historic and important republication of what I find to be one of the most deeply insightful books on the heroine and also on the masculine with heart. And we've talked about this, but I want to share this observation with the audience. As I read it, I found so many moments when I felt you were speaking to me and to other men about shared concerns. And let me name just a couple of them. The place of shame and guilt, of feeling not good enough, or of fitting a stereotype and trying to believe in it when we could not. Understanding ourselves through women and their aspirations and their suffocations made me feel very much a part of your audience. And I want to thank you for that. And to let men know that while it's entitled The Heroine's Journey, when you get it and begin to read it, I think you're going to feel that you too are being mirrored back through Maureen's prose. And that leads me to ask Maureen a couple of questions. What prompted you to research and to write so eloquently on the heroine in the first edition? What was your primary impetus or your inspiration? And what was going on in the culture at that time? So let me stop there, Maureen, and ask you to respond in any way you'd like to those questions.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you so much for doing this, Dennis. This is a real pleasure having you swoop in from Texas to be with us. So thank you. Yeah, I wrote this book in the 80s, and what was going on in the culture at that time was the second wave of feminism. And I was living in Los Angeles, in Venice, California. I had a family practice, and I was a therapist, and I was also teaching creative writing through the UCLA Extension Writers Program. And the other thing that was happening at that time was that Joseph Campbell was coming out from New York periodically to give workshops at what was then called the Human Relations Institute, now called Pacifica Graduate Institute. And it was very exciting. He was coming in the late 70s and early 80s. And then, of course, there was the Moyers program, The Power of Myth. And out of that came a kind of a booklet of going through the stages of the hero's journey. So I started to use that, running groups of both men and women through the stages of the hero's journey over a 10-month period, and really beginning to feel like that did not address the issues of the feminine, which was a real need at that time to heal the wounding of the feminine on both a personal and a cultural level. So I had been reading books about feminine spirituality by Chris Downing, who wrote The Goddess, by Jean Shinoda Bolen, The Goddesses in Every Woman.
Yeah.
Just, multitude of books, women really looking to understand the sacred feminine. And at the same time, I was part of the women's building in Los Angeles, where we were putting on presentations and art shows about the contemporary faces of the goddess. So I was looking at it through the lens of being a therapist, working primarily with women of all ages, and as a writing teacher, and also as an artist. So that's what the instigation was in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So you are going to see in a moment the diagram of the heroine's journey, and I'll go through that. But what I wanted to say that so many people know who've read the book or have heard me speak before is I went back to New York in, I think it was 81, to show the diagram of the heroine's journey to Mr. Campbell, who I had a close relationship with. And he said to me at the time, Maureen, women don't need to make the journey because they're the place that everyone is trying to get to. And I think what he really meant was the feminine in terms of soul or spirituality is the place that everyone is trying to get to.
Yeah.
But the women that I knew in my life as a therapist and as a friend and as a teacher and as a colleague, we were all trying to figure out this whole new dynamic of being women out in the world and still trying to find balance within our inner lives. So that was the inception or the origin story of the heroine's journey.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask you about Campbell, so I'm glad that you brought him up already. So
Yeah.
Can you now tell us, because this seems to be the nugget of the book, can you tell us about the stages of the heroine's journey?
Sure.
And its relevance today more than ever?
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah. And Michael, thank you for putting the diagram up. And I want to say quickly that I wrote this from the perspective of a father's daughter. And the journey is cyclic. And I think we go through the stages of the journey over and over during our life. And this is just a map. Some people will have some relationship to it, like Dennis was saying in the beginning, and other people won't. But this is what came to me. And it took me a long time to figure out what these stages meant. So again, very quickly, it starts with the separation from the feminine. And that often occurs when a personal mother, it was depressed or powerless or passive or angry or ineffectual, as some mothers of previous generations were, who had no choice about child rearing or child bearing. And they may have split off from their own creativity, their own sexuality, their spirituality. And so the young girl may have a hard time identifying with the mother or with the feminine. The second stage is the identification with the masculine, and our heroine searches for an identity in a masculine defined culture that's focused on achievement. And oftentimes this is the beginning of a split between achievement and relationship. She's trying to carve out her own niche in a very product-oriented, competitive environment. Along the way, she faces the road of trials that we all face in our journey of individuation. But women also have to overcome the myth of female inferiority or deficit thinking, the myth of female dependency, and the myth of romantic love as she strives for the illusory boon of success promised by the culture. And the next stage, the awakening to feelings of spiritual aridity, this was oftentimes when I saw people come into therapy because they felt like they did everything they were supposed to do, but they might have become bloodied in an attempt to do so. And there's this sense of, why do I feel so empty? You know, my creativity has dried up. And so the next stage oftentimes is a descent to the goddess or to the realms of her lost feminine soul as she begins to understand the power and the spirit of the divine feminine. At this stage, people usually try to reclaim the parts of themselves that they may have rejected at the beginning of the journey, reclaiming parts of the feminine. So the next stage is this urgent yearning to reconnect with the feminine in a way of redefining and understanding her own or his own feminine nature. And I think that we're very much here in the culture right now, as we've been in this period of lockdown and really trying to understand what's important to our personal psyche as well as to the collective. The next stage is called healing the mother-daughter split. And if there actually has been tension between one's mother and one's daughter, it's time really to heal that split and to become good mothers to ourselves. The next stage is healing the wounded masculine. And what I mean by that is looking at the wounded or unrelated aspects of one's own masculine nature, identifying them, things like domination or being controlling or manipulating or being power hungry, having intolerance for other people's points of view, toxic masculinity. And oftentimes we project those qualities on the men in our lives or the partners in our lives, and taking those back and healing them for ourselves. And then the last stage is the integration of masculine and feminine. The current problems are not solved, the conflicts may remain, but one's suffering, as long as a person does not evade it, will lead to a new life. So in developing a new feminine consciousness, we have to have an equally strong masculine consciousness to get our voice out into the world. So as I said before, you may or may not find yourself on this particular map, or you may see that you've been through some of these stages over and over. But I did write this from the perspective of a father's daughter, heavily identified with the masculine. And so for me, the whole journey has been to develop my feminine nature. So maybe, I hope that's helpful.
Well, it's so helpful. I know, and I've seen it and I've studied it, but to hear you walk us through it adds another dimension to it. We're okay. So I'd like to read a part of the book that really resonated and moved me. And it's at the conclusion. And if any of you in the audience has your copy, I'm going to read from page 193 and a little bit into page 194. Because I found myself as a man resonating completely with these two paragraphs. So here's what Maureen writes. The word heroine has had many meanings, and the woman who has borne the title has worn many guises. She has been a damsel in distress, waiting for a rescue from the knight in shining armor, a Valkyrie riding on air, leading her troops into battle, an artist alone, painting bones in the desert, a tiny nun healing the wounds of the poor in Calcutta, and a supermom juggling briefcase and baby formula. She has changed the face of woman with each passing generation. And then this second paragraph. The task of today's heroine is to mine the silver and gold within herself. She must develop a positive relationship with her inner man with heart and find the voice of her woman of wisdom to heal her estrangement from the sacred feminine. As she honors her body and soul, as well as her mind, she heals the split within herself and the culture. I think that is just so important to contemplate. Women today are acquiring the courage to express their vision, the strength to set limits, and the willingness to take responsibility for themselves and others in a new way. They are reminding the people of their origins, the necessity to live mindfully, and their obligation to preserve life on earth. Now, those two passages suggest to me an evolution, if not a revolution, of consciousness itself, and that all people could learn much from what you, Maureen, put forth here. Is this indeed a golden moment of cooperation as a new way of seeing one another?
Oh, I certainly hope so. I mean, we're being challenged to such a degree right now. We've got to find a way to broach our divide, not only outside, but within ourselves.
Yes.
And I think what I'd like to do now is just read a little bit from the foreword. Because Michael was asking me before we started how much of the book has been revised. And the book has been revised in the sense of trying to bring it to the present cultural moment, certainly with my foreword and Chris Downing's preface. So I'd just like to read a little bit because it was important for me to look back and see what has changed and what hasn't changed. But our present moment is showing great change, which I think we can all celebrate. So what I wrote was, women's lives have a mythology that is different than a man's. So we deny who we are by measuring success, fulfillment, or satisfaction by the milestones of the hero's journey. At the time I wrote the book, I wanted women to understand that the prejudice against us and against feminine values has been a force emanating from the larger society rather than as an indictment of our own shortcomings. I think it's been emanating emanating from the larger society for at least 5,000 years.
Mm.
The heroine's journey struck a nerve for women of many cultures. The book was immediately translated into over a dozen foreign languages, including Farsi, Korean, and most recently Polish.
Mm.
Since 1990, there has been a dramatic change in focus for women. The focus is now on themes of identity, relationship, connection, compassion, and empowerment. Women are making a huge difference in society by showing what can be done when women step forward together. We have just seen this in the election of the first Black Asian American woman, daughter of immigrants, to the office of Vice President Kamala Harris.
Yes.
So I think we need to celebrate this particular time in our culture.
Yeah, beautiful, beautifully said. Another area I've resonated with is the Just Say No Club, which you personally invited me into at least a decade ago. You gave me an infinite open enrollment period to join, and I refused because I was too busy. I find this, quote, never enough, a powerful scourge, and have for my personal life. As president and chief heroine officer of this club, can you speak to both women and men on this demanding and often damning condition of not being able to say no in order perhaps to rescue oneself and from the tyranny of being success-driven?
Yeah, I think you just named it when you said the tyranny of being success-driven, because that exists in a patriarchal culture, and that's how we are living. You know, we're focused on more and more achievement, and if we don't achieve, then, as you said, we feel not enough. And that was part of looking at the myth of deficit thinking or inferiority. But it does come down to, and this is, I saw this in the stage of spiritual aridity, of never feeling enough. And I hear that from women all of the time. And you have shown me also that men feel that way of never being enough.
Yes.
So there's, it's such a deep wound. Instead of us feeling I'm perfectly okay the way I am. I had a wonderful therapist, I guess it was in the 80s or early 90s, Anne Levine, and she gave me an exercise to deal with this. So I'm going to share this exercise. I gave it recently to a young filmmaker that I was working with, because she was talking about always feeling not enough in relationship to the male filmmakers that she works with, and they're always denigrating her skills. So anyway, the exercise goes like this. Take a piece of paper and make 3 columns and divide them into 3 spaces. The first column, what did I do today? That's what you wrote. What did I do today? Second column, how did you feel? How did I feel? And the third column, and that's enough. And so you actually write it. Okay, today, knowing you, Dennis, you were probably up at 4:30 writing. So today I wrote a chapter of a book. How do I feel? I feel good. And then write, and that's enough. And she told me to do that every day for a month until I started to feel like I was enough. And I found it to be a very, very helpful exercise. So I really hope that everyone who feels like they're are not enough that you'll do it. You know, whether it's just today I did the dishes. How did I feel? I enjoyed the water. And that's enough.
Yes, simple, but constant. It seems
Yeah.
like the repetition is really crucial.
Yes, particularly the repetition of the third column, which says, and that's enough.
And that's enough.
Yeah.
You know, knowing you as long as I have, I recognize in you a superb creative soul
Mm.
in painting, in photography, in writing, in leading workshops in writing, in coaching women, as a therapist, as a mother, and as a partner. For all those writers out there, could you say something about how you wrote this book, your creative process? What was your creative writing schedule like?
Yeah, thank you for asking me that question. And thanks for all the laudits, Dennis. You made me feel like I'm enough right now.
You're more than enough.
Thank you. It took me 8 years to write this book. The diagram that you all saw came to me as an image. And it took me 8 years to figure out what the image really meant to take it apart. I was teaching and I had a practice and working full time, except for Thursday mornings. It was my only time to write. So I wrote every Thursday morning for 8 years, and that's how long it took to write the book. And I was very lucky that Shambhala was interested in it. They had done a book of mine before The Heroine's Journey. They had done a book called Spinning Inward, Using Guided Imagery with Children. And when I told them I was working on this, they said, well, you know, write it and then show it to us. And so that's what I did. And I think I mentioned that the book now is in 14 languages. It was just translated into Polish, which I'm quite thrilled about, because every once in a while I'll get an email from a woman someplace in the world saying, you know, I can find The Heroine's Journey in English, but what about Portuguese and what about Polish? And this particular woman in Poland really became a pest to Shambhala. And so they found a Polish translation for her and the women in Poland. The other thing I want to mention is there's a wonderful group of women in Australia who are doing a documentary based on the heroine's journey. They're following 6 women, including an Aboriginal woman, in terms of those women's journeys and how they relate to this specific monomyth or diagram of the heroine's journey.
That's wonderful. And you mentioned Christine's foreword. And what else is new in either the book itself or the workbook that accompanies it? And I want the audience to know that there is a workbook as a companion.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis, because I'm holding it up.
Yes.
I wrote the Heroine's Journey workbook a couple of years after writing the book as a response to the workshops I was doing with women in this country, Canada, Mexico, throughout Europe. I developed exercises to go with the stages of the heroine's journey. So the main, and then that was out of print for several years. And I kept getting queries from people saying, you know, I'd like to use this with my women's group, or I'd like to use it individually. So Shambhala decided to bring out the workbook, and the workbook is where I've done more revisions certainly than the original book.
Okay.
So the workbook has guided imagery, dream work, and creative exercises. And so, yes, they are a companion piece. But if you're working with groups, or really even individually, you might, but definitely with groups, then you'd want to get the workbook.
Okay, good to know for everyone in the audience. And as
Thank
we finish up this section of the webinar, what's next for you in terms of workshops or, yes?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. I'm doing a workshop in Santa Fe, if possible, May 14th to the 16th. It'll be a weekend workshop on the heroine's journey, using it as a guide for writing. So it'll be a combination of the heroine's journey and memoir, because I teach memoir. And then I'm doing a writing workshop for the International Women's Writing Guild, a Zoom writing workshop on March 10th. And so that'll be online. And
Wonderful. Please.
I'm working on a book on myth and memoir.
Oh, wonderful. Well, so Michael, I'm going to ask you, because we want to leave time now for the audience for question and answer. So do you want to instruct folks on how they can do that?
Sure. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, all you have to do is look at the bottom of your screen, and there should be a Q&A function in the lower center. You just press on that and then type your questions in, and Dennis and of course Maureen will be able to answer. While we wait for those, I do have a question for you, Maureen.
Okay, Michael.
20 languages, that's amazing.
14.
14, okay. I'm adding some on to you, sorry.
They're coming.
But this many languages, as far as, how does that make you feel as a writer to be able to, for your publication, which is one of the best selling of Shambhala, to have so many languages and to have your work come out globally like that? It's just, it's incredible.
It makes me feel humble, quite frankly, and very excited. The most exciting thing that happened for me was I was contacted by women from Iran who wanted to have the book translated. And when I contacted Shambhala and asked them if they would respond, they told me that Iran was not part of international copyright, so that they could not really find a publisher in Iran that they could work with. So what the women did was they translated it themselves, and they brought it out, and it was banned for 5 years because of the references to sexuality, to spirituality, and to poetry. And so when a new administration came in, the book was allowed to be sold then. And it's been very exciting for me to be in communication with them by email, knowing that they're using the book. And they sent me pictures of women in a heroine's journey workshop with all of the women with headscarves. And it was just extraordinarily touching. So, but I've been lucky to do workshops in Holland, in Amsterdam, and in Ireland, and in Barcelona, and Mexico City, and Canada, and other places. So I've met the people who have really tried to get the book translated, and that's been, you know, I felt like I wasn't writing this book just for me. I felt like I was certainly writing it for the women of my generation and the women who come after my generation.
Wow. Well, thank you. Okay, we have a question from Wendy Lukomsky. Hi, Maureen, it's Wendy. And then I've not yet done the 3-column exercise of what I did today, etc. But I plan to, and I can imagine if I did it, I'd feel like I'd want to say, and this is too much, instead of this is enough. Has this conversation ever come up?
That's great, Wendy. I like that. So you'd want to say, and this is too much instead of this is enough. I don't know what to say, except, yeah, do it for a month and then let me know how it works out.
I can relate to Wendy's, I don't know if it's a predicament, but a condition, because I would feel comfortable responding as she does in the 3rd column.
Great. Okay. Molly writes, you mentioned a couple of times, by the way of clarifying, that you wrote this as a father's daughter. Would your image diagram be different had you written it from another perspective, like a mother's daughter or an orphan? It's a great, great question.
Wow.
And, you know, I'm sure it would be. Because we wouldn't be starting with the separation from the feminine. So I don't know, Molly, that may be something that you might want to take on yourself. I wrote it as a father's daughter because I definitely was a father's daughter. And I think that many of us in the culture are father's daughters because we live in a culture that it's a father's culture, really.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Henrika wrote kind of a follow-up. Would you like to address that one? It's one down from.
Yeah, I can't. Okay, I'm bringing it up now. I can't get all of it. Yeah, she said, you mentioned being a father's daughter. Could you discuss how the heroine's journey may be different for a mother's daughter? Would she have to go back and connect with the father? I would say yes, you know, to have that completion, maybe not her personal father, but certainly to develop a relationship with her inner father. Yeah. I'm oftentimes asked this question about, you know, would the journey be different for a mother's daughter? I think mother's daughters probably may not have as much work to do to heal their feminine nature because they've already developed a relationship with the feminine early on. Their job may be the need to heal the relationship with the masculine. So I'd be interested in what you have to say about that, Hendrika.
In case you didn't know, Henrika wrote a fine memoir, When
I
a
do
Toy
know.
Dog Became a Wolf and the Moon Broke Curfew.
Yes,
So if anybody's looking for a good memoir, that's one to pick.
Yes, it is.
it's
Agreed.
it's a
Yes.
brilliant memoir.
Yep.
And I understand even better about your question, Hendrika, because your primary relationship there during the Second World War was with your mother. And she was such a heroine for you and, you know, just an extraordinarily strong woman. Hey, Carolyn Perry asks, 30 years ago, where did you think the heroine would be today? How do you feel about that? Well, one thing that I found out in looking back 30 years is on an inner level, we're still dealing with this feeling of inferiority and deficit thinking. And so I hoped 30 years ago, we would not still be looking at the same issue. But as I said before, when I was reading the preface, I really feel like this has been an issue that has gone on for 5,000 years, for at least 5,000 years, with the denigration of the feminine. So how do I feel about that? I feel saddened, but I also feel very hopeful, because I think all of those little girls and boys last week looking at Kamala Harris and thinking, that could be me, that could be me.
Yeah.
I think that she has given us so much hope. Here is a very strong, articulate woman who's also carries her womanhood in a beautiful way. So I think that the wheel has just shifted.
Yeah.
Agree.
Okay, have any of the women you worked with expressed concern that if they follow the map stages, the men in their lives may feel threatened? Well, they could invite them to follow the map stages with them. No, I have not heard that concern at all. What I noticed when I was doing live bookstore events was that just as many men related, as Dennis said tonight, just as many men related to the journey as women did. So I'm not quite sure how they would feel threatened. I'd have to have more information. Judith Rubenstein writes, given the advances in women's rights and the changes in our culture since you wrote the book, do you believe young women today are on the similar heroine's journey? How is it different today? That's a really good question, Judy. What I have found in talking to young women, because there's been a lot of young women who've just started reading this book, is that that there are tremendous changes in the external world, but not as many changes in the internal world. So going back to the myth of inferiority and deficit thinking, I think they're still struggling with that. I just want to mention one thing in terms of coming back to Kamala Harris. Last week, I had the privilege of working as a poll worker in Santa Barbara at San Marcos High School. And there was a young woman, I think she was 16, working with me at the station where we were. She was part Sri Lankan, part Indian, and she was so excited. Of course, this was before the votes were counted. She just kept talking about what a difference this made for her and for so many little girls. She kept talking about, can you imagine all of those little girls who see a woman of color becoming, hopefully, Vice President of the United States? And her enthusiasm was just so exciting to me. You know, it was a real wake-up call for this next generation.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, we have a few more here. Would you like to keep going?
Sure, I did not see them.
Okay, we answered Judith.
Yeah, I did Judith.
And one
Okay.
from Tony.
Yes.
Okay, I can't see it, so maybe you could read it to me.
Tony and all of us would like to know how to get on your mailing list to hear about your events.
Oh, Tony, good question. I have a website, MaureenMurdock.com, And I also, my email is Murdock Maureen, and Murdock is Murdock, Maureen, Maureen @gmail.com.
Okay, and then we have Joanne Marlowe, who's asking, when you were researching the book early on, did you learn anything from the Native American culture? And do you think
Oh,
the journey of the Native American woman informed your thoughts?
yes, yeah. White Buffalo Woman in particular, the Lakota Sioux
Mm,
mythological figure who brought the pipe to the people. The Native Americans know a lot about balance, and they talk about it through the symbology of the prayer pipe. The bowl of the pipe is the feminine, the stem of the pipe is the masculine. And so together, when they're put together and tobacco is burned and smoked, that is the integration of the masculine and feminine.
mm,
So, and I do write about that or write about White Buffalo Woman in the book. What I found about the integration of masculine and feminine, also of the plant world with the animal world and the spirit world and the human world and the angelic world, is similar to Celtic mythology. So yes, I write about both of those in the heroine's journey, because it really felt like those two mythologies, the Native American and Celtic mythology, have so much to teach us about balance. And that's what we need so desperately right now in the world. So thank you
mm,
for that question.
Yeah.
yes. Dennis, would you like to, did you have any more questions to ask?
Yeah, as I listened to you responding to these really fine observations and questions, I was thinking about what you said about the myth of inferiority. And I'm wondering, and I'll just wonder aloud and ask you to respond, can part of that be emanating from the lack or the insufficient development of the myth of interiority?
Mm.
In other words, the heroine's journey, the hero's journey, they both take immense courage for one to choose and decide, yes, the journey that I'm on is maybe too superficial, too exhausting. What is my option? Well, one is to turn inward, and that's frightening. That's frightening territory. So I just wonder about the myth of interiority being cultivated prior to or along with this wonderful heroine's journey that we spoke about early on.
I see the whole issue of an interiority in the stage of spiritual aridity. It's when we come to that place of dryness that we do start to go in. I mean, first, what we do is overdo everything. So we overwork, we oversex, we overbuy, we overeat, we overdrink, over. And then we get to a point where, you know, we've tried to fill ourselves with all of the externals. And at that point, the dreams start changing. And so then it's time to look within. And you're right. I mean, people don't want to do that. It's painful. But
Mm,
I feel like it's just so necessary for all of us to reclaim those aspects of ourselves that we've pushed down and hidden in our desire to achieve. It goes back to your question about, you know, doing more and more and more. So, one of the positive things about COVID is that people have had to slow down. I know everybody's really bored with it right now, but if you think back to the beginning of the lockdown, when we could all hear the birds, I mean, it was just extraordinary to be able to hear the birds because we weren't listening to the hum of traffic. So, and people were reaching out to their particular community, with a deep desire for connection and love and healing. So, yeah, this desire for interiority, the whole globe is being asked to do that right now.
Yes. And it points out to me the virtue of gaps, of opening spaces up and not feeling compelled to fill them with another task. And that ability to restrain and to hold back and to open a space, I think, is very much a part of the journey that you lay out in the book, either implicitly or explicitly.
Yeah, I talk about the fact that being is much harder than doing. We're all addicted to doing. Learning how to breathe, be involves breathing and slowing down and re-entering our bodies. Because when we're as busy as we are, we're not embodied. And you've written about that. You've written about sacred wounds and how the light enters the wound. So, yeah, I think this is a time when people are more focused on being embodied.
Yes. And I remember when I was researching the wounded body, I was reading a book entitled The Origin of the Sacred. And in it, this, I think Duff is his last name. Anyhow, he pointed out that etymologically, the word to be bloodied and to be blessed, he tracked through the old German and found that they had the same root. So there's something there about wounds that are blessings, if for no other reason than they slow one down. And maybe you can't get out of bed.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe you're hospitalized, and anybody that has spent time in a hospital knows it functions on a whole other level of rituals and behaviors, and you're not even allowed to wear your own clothing. There's a ritual dress uniform that so your body's easily accessible. So I just found that observation, that etymology of those two words really made me rethink and reimagine what it is to be wounded.
Yeah, yeah. And I know that we're almost ready to stop, but with the word wound, I just want to bring up again that this book was written to help heal the wounded feminine, not only on an individual level, but certainly on a cultural level. And I really hope that's what we're doing right now. And hopefully soon we'll be able to address trying to heal the toxic masculine that we've all been having to deal with for the last 4 years.
Yeah. Maureen, this has been an absolute delight to have this conversation with you, and to have so many from the audience have the opportunity to join in. So thank you for this evening. And Michael, thank you for making it possible, quite honestly. And so much gratitude to you as well.
And thank you, Dennis. Thank you, for being my co-companion and conspirator
Yes.
And thank you, Michael. I just so appreciate your bringing a local author to Chaucer's to speak. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
This was a nice
thank you both.
conspiracy, the three of us. Yes.
It was. Thank you both, Maureen. That was amazing. And please, if I may remind everybody to purchase Maureen's book, you can on chaucersbooks.com, or you can come into the store. Also, the last question was, when can this video be viewed? It can for up to a week, let's say. On chaucersbooks.com, just click on Maureen's event. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Dennis.
Thank
Please
you,
have a
Michael.
safe night.
Thanks,
Yes.
Michael.
Thanks so
Good
much.
night.
Good
Yep.
night.
Stay safe.
Stay safe. Ciao.